told you earlier, this is no pressure. Essentially, the old model of how you do the observation, I think I've told you before, is sometimes just an administrator would come in, and if they were there 5 minutes, became 10 minutes, became 15 minutes, all of a sudden you knew it was your observation. They would do the rankings, you would come down and sign. I like this model a little bit better because we get to talk about it, we get to reflect. Really, that's all that I ask out of any teacher from year to year is we be reflective. Me and Coach Smith, we've talked lots about this. We try and reflect upon our personal lives, our marriages, our finances. I think that's one of the things we have in common is reflection. And I think when I was teaching, that was probably my greatest asset was I would be reflective of every single lesson. And one of the things in T-test is monitor and adjust, which monitor and adjust is kind of like a reflection in real time. Like you're sitting there, you're monitoring, you're reflecting, and you may have to adjust if you see that things aren't going well, things like that. So I'm not going to take a standard by standard, line item by line item, like I said, but the one thing I do want to begin with is when I do observations or even walkthroughs, you may notice you may at some point in your life teach elementary school. An administrator might do a walkthrough, and they tend to do elementary school things like carry Post-it notes and write a smiley face and give it to you when they walk out as instant feedback, or they'll write good job, or they'll write great questioning, or whatever. I don't tend to do that. I tend to just come in, see what I see, and my phone probably went off 20 times while I was in there, and I shut my computer, and I leave out, and I got to go to do the next task. So my first question for you is upon kind of immediate reflectiveness of, okay, the administrator's out of the room, I'm back to life as normal. What was kind of your initial thoughts, I guess?
I think the thing that I would have liked, I'm still working out how I think the best way to do it will be with the COVID restrictions, but the group structure, I felt like a couple of groups it turned into social hour as opposed to really staying on task.
Yeah.
And from what I understand with the cooperative learning, they're supposed to have designated roles, which they did not have.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I initially started doing that earlier in the year is some students were hesitant to work in a group, and I felt like letting them pick a group would motivate them. But a couple of students, one, he's been really kind of quiet to himself, and then all of a sudden another student came he's friends with, and now that dynamic changed. And then I had another student who had been out with a concussion, and when she came back, I think her friends just haven't seen her as frequently. And so that kind of created I felt like there was more socializing than I would have liked. To me, that was like the big sticker I would have liked to have done something about.
Okay.
But I think that's like the main thing first thing that comes to mind.
Gotcha. We were only in there for part of that time. So offhand, I didn't notice anything too major. Let me think. The roles thing is good. How you want to do groups, I mean, you're free reign. If you wanted to take this table, flip them, and they face each other, and you have a group of 4, I'm okay with that. If you wanted to have it split down the middle and they put up a divider, and you have what's called elbow partners or shoulder partners or beside you, and then face partners, I don't know if you've ever heard of Kagan strategies. It's different strategies of how students can talk in structured ways. And we can talk more about that. I'm sure the library has a book, or even Ms. Norris probably has a book about Kagan strategies, but it's big on elbow partners, face partners. So how you want to structure that's completely up to you. Then if you do want to choose to have them in groups of 4 and people have roles, that's something good to have. I saw at one point you had written on the board, I think some role name, Lorax and some other, was that it?
I've been implementing that more with the math lab.
Gotcha.
Which is the math lab, I think, the geometry students, I feel like a lot of the time they'll stay on task. The math labs, I feel like they really need more structure with it. So I had been thinking about moving that forward to geometry, but I wasn't sure. I hadn't quite got a feel for exactly what I wanted that to look like.
I've seen people do that a number of different ways. I've seen people use playing cards, ace, jack, queen, king. And, you have a group of 4 and one is the ace, and they know that the ace's role is to do whatever. One is the king, and they know that the king is the scribe, or the jack may be the one that's gonna present the work, that type of stuff. So I like cooperative learning, and when you start talking about structure, by all means, Math Lab definitely needs more structure than geometry students. All students need structure. They need to come into a class, and that's the dimension 3 is your routines, procedures, classroom culture, all that. That's dimension 3. So when you look at this, dimension 1 is planning. Some people are great planners, terrible executors. Some people are terrible planners. Our head principal, terrible planner. But then he can jump up in front of a crowd of several hundred people and keep them engaged for 45 minutes with little to no planning. He's a great executor. That's, I think, why a lot of the school type stuff, he leaves up to me to do the planning and the logistical, and he can be the politician, the face, and go to the Rotary luncheons and all that kind of stuff. But he's very good at that. Master scheduling, his brain just doesn't think in that capacity. So that's why I'm here. So, okay, so the cooperative groups, what about the actual instruction? And I have my notes. That's the benefit to me, is I have my recording and I have my notes, and even in my scripting and my noting, sometimes I may get behind, or sometimes I may hone in on one thing and then something changes my attention. I always can go back to recordings and things like that, but you don't have that advantage, and you don't have the advantage of scripted notes and things like that. But in terms of the instruction, and specifically you had the graphic organizer, you had the warm-up, you had the video, you had the practice problems, anything instructionally that you can think of that went, you may say, hey, it went straight to plan, or you may say, you wish you would have done something different. Was there anything reflective about that?
There were a few things that I think could have been improved. One thing that I think was a missed opportunity is I kept scrolling up to show them the organizer and then back down. And I should have just let them actually look at it themselves and told them, look at your organizer.
Yeah.
I ended up doing some of that with the next class, but that didn't occur to me in the moment.
Yes.
And so I think I ended up doing more of the work that they should have been doing, actually looking at the organizer.
Yeah.
Second issue, this wasn't major, but there was another student who had started talking, and I forgot the color code when I was doing my substitution. And I felt like when I worked through one of those, simplifying radical problem, I felt like when I did that, it just didn't come across quite as clear. I feel like if I was a student looking at that for the first time, it needed a better organizing.
Yeah.
So I should have had the colors.
Is the simplifying radicals where you had the square root of something, you started branching it down?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's probably where Coach Smith got lost somewhere.
Yeah, that I think should have been structured a little better with the color. And I mean, I did have some distraction that I think I had initially thought about doing that in my head, and then it just didn't come out quite that. I would have liked that.
Gotcha. All right.
And then one small thing, I kind of wish that the video, I showed him an engineering example, kind of briefly, and said that we're not quite there. I kind of wish I had had something that would have actually used more directly one of the things that they were doing. Because I mean, you could do the trigonometry we're getting into, but I think at that exact moment, I think a more direct application probably would have been better suited.
Yeah. Well, I like that the video was you. There's nothing wrong with using videos already off of YouTube, but I like how that video was one that you had created. And I think it was tritones. Tritones are irrational. And like I script, I take notes. It was 3 minutes, 43 seconds long. And that was kind of the beginning of the issue with the little girl, was at the beginning of that video. So, and we'll talk about that in a second. We all know in the room that that was a bit of a hiccup, but we knew in the pre-conference, we'd already talked about that a little bit. I have to balance wanting to see how you respond to stuff versus me trying to keep the integrity of the classroom and me stepping in. So I started texting the other administrators, come down and get her, and it took them a lot longer than I'd hoped, because it almost came to the point where I went over there and was like, hey, can you go ahead and step out, you know? And we'll talk about that more in a second, but when you show videos like that, I tried as much as possible with anything that I did, whether it be a warm-up, a video. In chemistry, you can do demonstrations that you try and make them seamless. And the way that you have to make them seamless is to make them tie into each other. So instead of, okay, here's a video, okay, now let's do the notes, you piggyback off the video, you ask questions, you provide a little bit of extension to try and tie it into the next thing. So, but once again, we're all learning, hindsight's 2020. So let's see here. I'm just gonna go through and I'm gonna talk about some specific things within the lesson. We're also gonna talk about area of reinforcement, which is, hey, you're rocking and rolling. And let's say that I ranked you, and everything, I'm not gonna go ahead and say it yet, but let's say that I ranked you, from developing all the way up to accomplished. Your area of reinforcement doesn't necessarily have to be the one that's accomplished. Your area of refinement means you could do a little bit better. I mean, we can pick a myriad of things, but it's just, reinforcement is what I felt like you're right now doing really well at. Refinement is we can get better. When you've been doing this 4 and 5 years and you're already good, so you're gonna be much better, it's even harder for us to find refinement because great lessons are difficult to find ways to improve. And the further, I tell people, the further you get, and this is just for us going forward, if I was halfway between developing and proficient, I err on the side of the teacher. The further I get past proficient into accomplished or distinguished, I tighten up. If it says that they had to be reflective of data, and in I've never heard you talk of data, or in our pre-conference, you never even mentioned data-driven strategies or something like that, the teacher won't get distinguished. If in distinguished, technology has to be used, and they didn't use technology, then I tighten up. Does that make sense? So, and just showing a video, in my mind, is not technology usage. I mean, we could do that with an overhead or whatever, so. All right, so we're gonna go through some little parts that are reflective. We'll go through some things that I thought were good, and then some things that weren't even bad, but just, one is a pattern that I noticed with kids, and it may help you moving forward. We always talk about teacher-focused and student-focused. So the first thing is, and it was only in this observation, I've seen you before utilize students. And I don't know if you were just kind of nervous in this observation that I wanted to see 100% you teaching, but I think a little more of utilizing the students, having them come up, work problems, things like that, because the Pythagorean theorem, if I remember right, that was pretty much review, or should have been. But the fact that it should have been known by them and you went back and covered it, that, when you look at these indicators, that's an adjustment for students' gaps. So you realize, yes, we've covered it, but not 100% of kids know it. So I'm gonna, one more time, I'm gonna make a little adjustment, we're gonna go over it. But somebody in that class, I guarantee, knew it. So you might have could have done one, and the other one, pull them up there and have them do it. And that's for anything, to try and put focus on the students. So even when you turn the students loose for them to do, I think you gave them 25 minutes of structured practice, you might have said, okay, I'm gonna set the timer, and I brought the assignment with me. And you might from the get-go say, hey, you got 5 minutes, and you're in groups of 2 or 3, and you want them to get through 2 problems, or maybe even 1 problem, and then reconvene, because you've already done your teaching. You've done the teacher-focused part. All right, let's see what y'all can do. Then reconvene them and let them guide. And the thing is, you have to make sure you have a group that knows how to do it. So that comes down to actively monitoring. You're going around, you're keeping them on task, and you have a group in your back pocket that you know knows what they're doing. Don't send a group up there that doesn't know what they're doing, or a pair, or a single student. But have somebody that you know they know what they're doing, they're able to follow the graphic organizer. You've gotten feedback from them that they understand what they're doing, and utilize them, so. Did you know he's fluent in Spanish?
I did not.
Okay, he's fluent in Spanish. He can talk to them kids in Spanish. I wasn't afraid as a chemistry teacher to allow a struggling English language learner to learn from a student in their native language. Now, if I thought there was lots of snickering and there's some things that were off topic, I would address it. But to have a kid really like speaking Spanish and show another student, I'm all for that, you know, so.
There's an opportunity for differentiated instruction with him. One time, when I was in my health course, it was a young lady that was from Mexico. She could read in English, but she still needed a little extra support. So every time I gave her directions for something, it was in Spanish, and also she had a peer student that would help her complete the assignments, and then she was able to translate them from Spanish into English with Spanish language.
Would you say that you feel like students in general struggle with fractions? Like just high school age kids? Have you gotten that kind of feedback, or have you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have trouble with fractions.
Yeah.
So.
Do you feel like they struggle with the concept of square root?
Yes.
Yeah. So.
And squaring.
Yes. So we all know square root of 36. We know that that's 6.
Right.
We know that square root of, if I were to ask, and this is something, I hope my wife never sees this recording, because sometimes I have to do think alouds with my wife because she's not very good at simple math. Sometimes I have to do a think, like she's like, how did you know that? Or even I'm in a church meeting and there's 5 of us and they'll state some number. I'm like, that's about 78, 79%. And they'll all take their phones out and check it. I'm like, it's right, trust me, it's right. And then I do a think aloud to tell them the quick math I did in my head to get there. So I would be willing to bet some of this stuff that you're doing from that assignment, if instead of square root of 3, it was just a number, they might be able to do it. And they get hung up on this whole, I don't understand what square root of 3 is.
Right.
So we know square root of 4 is 2. And we know that 3 is just a little less than 4, so we know that square root of 3 is a little less than 2. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's that think aloud that I think sometimes kids need to be exposed to. And you can even tie this into classroom culture, because Josh Leffler has a little saying with his kids. In Leffler's class, we're not afraid of fractions, because the kids struggle with fractions. We're not afraid of fractions, so we're not afraid of square roots. We know that there's just a number squared that equals that, you know, and part of that goes back to just classroom culture, you know. In my class, we're not afraid of square roots. We understand squared is just this and square root is the opposite, you know. So, but that was one thing that I kind of reflected on, like, I bet if they understood that that's just a number, that's all it really is, that it might make it a little easier on them. So even some of your problems start out without square roots or without fractions, and then you slide that stuff in later and you say, look guys, we're just doing the same thing. A square root, this is gonna equal a number, and even have them do it in a calculator. And they can see, okay, well, square root of 5 is just a little more than 2, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Kids get afraid, especially with math, especially kids that are beaten down over years of struggling, and 1 year of having a poor math teacher can set them back drastically. So, let me see here. All right, so your graphic organizer, did you make that yourself?
I did.
Okay, that's what I figured. It was good. I liked it. What I found is when you were going around, one of the first things that you were having to do with each kid was, is it a leg or is it a hypotenuse? And that is the simplest thing. And you covered it a little bit briefly at the very beginning with Pythagorean theorem.
Right.
I felt like after you've had 3 or 4 kids that you've had to start back and say, okay, is that a leg or hypotenuse? Then you maybe should have reconvened and even drawn it up here to leave it for them to visually see. And maybe it was on You might have had that on the actual,
Come to think of it, this was in that training for workshop model, I think they called that like catch and release.
I don't know
Yeah.
that part, but even something as
Yeah.
simple, and that goes back to monitor and adjust. You're monitoring,
Gotcha.
and you can see that, okay, 6 kids in a row are struggling with what's the leg and what's the hypotenuse.
Right.
And I started thinking through, I would try and come up with acronyms and things. The hypotenuse is the longest side, right? Well, leg is a short word, and the leg is the shorter side. So you could tell them the longer side is always the hypotenuse. But even having them just write it out here, draw a triangle, and label leg, hypotenuse.
Right.
And even, I know it's in here, let me see here, this right here in parentheses, one of the 2 legs, and this one says the hypotenuse. Had you written, or had the kids write, and don't you do it, make them do it, leg, hypotenuse. Just at the
Gotcha.
very top from the, I mean, it's right in their face, what to do.
Gotcha.
I felt like that might have been something that would have helped them get started on those.
Right, I think I've heard that's a blank graphic organizer,
Yeah.
where they kind of, that's a good idea.
So, let me look at what else. I already mentioned that. There was one of the, when you were working with a kid, I think Jesus did this a lot. I call it spiritual jujitsu, which is when the Pharisees and Sadducees asked him a question, he would respond with a question. And I think a lot of the times when you're working with kids, that's a good tactic. So sometimes when they give you an answer, you respond with a question. So there was one time you asked, did they give us a leg or a hypotenuse? And the kid answered wrong. You said leg and it should have been hypotenuse. And you responded back with, are you sure? In the case of always there only being 2 answers, and you ask, are you sure? Most of the time, that makes the student know to just flip-flop their answer. So, and it takes practice,
Right.
but saying, how do you know? And it literally takes you as an individual,
Right.
how do you know? Or show me how you got that, or something like that. Because most of the time when you say, are you sure? That's a good response when there's 4 answers. And you might see what their second pick
Right.
is, so. Now, this is me being nitpicky on that. I mean, but that's,
It's kind of like just asking open-ended questions to where it's not a yes or no. They kind of have to dig deep and process more to come up with a solution.
any questions about what I've said so far?
The only thing tumbling around in my head is, I know that some of the bigger the classes, the more hesitant they are to get up. Historically, I've asked for
To get what?
I usually will ask for volunteers when students do work on the board.
Yeah.
And I feel like for the bigger classes,
They don't wanna get up, is that what you're
right,
saying?
I think it's because it's a bigger class and they don't want to get up in front of a bunch of people.
Yeah.
But I completely agree with you mentioned about
Yeah.
not being student-centered as opposed to teacher-centered. I think that's kind of a, Ms. Mohammed had mentioned that, and I think that's something that's just easy to revert to.
Yeah.
But for the bigger class, do you think there's a best way to get students to actually get up and do problems?
Well, sometimes you have to tell them, you don't ever wanna harm a relationship. If you got a little girl that's about to just have a nervous breakdown, you don't wanna make her come up. But, when you have students do a warm-up and you travel around and you see, well, you can tell whether they know it or not, and you pick on the one, and you say, hey, Brian, I could see that you really knew what you were doing. Will you come up and help me and show the rest of the class? You know, that's usually, I would use that initial time of me getting to check their work, and that's how I would pick which kids I'm gonna have come up, so. And then, even when the kid's doing it, like y'all agreed, you just call on a kid, do you think he's doing it right or wrong? You know, or even tell Brian, you know Brian's gonna be right, you say, stop. And then you may call on a kid and say, hey, what's the next step? And just see if the kid knows it. So, questioning is powerful, and it's tough because we wanna give. As a teacher, you have all the information you wanna give. And I know math is its own beast, but if you can ask questions in a way to have the kid tell you what's easier for you to just tell them, well, I'm just gonna tell them, rather than do an inquiry lab in science, I'm gonna sit them all down, I'm gonna have them face me, and I'm gonna tell them about the solar system, rather than them, go online and do and answer questions, whatever, so. But if you can ask questions in a way to get them to tell you what you just wanna tell them, those are the best types of questions, so. Let me see. I think just historically, this is just me being honest with you, I think maybe you might have been a little nervous. There was kids coming in a little late and it started filling up. And I was glad, because I didn't want Mike to have to be like in the middle of kids filming. And I told him, I texted him initially that spot was open. Then another kid came in and I was like, please don't take that spot.
Right.
And they didn't. I think I've seen a little bit better from you in some walkthroughs, me just being honest with you. Not that this was bad. I think you're a good planner. I think, let's talk about ISIS real quick. Some battles in life, some hills you don't wanna die on, and she wanted to get out. I think, did she ask to go see a counselor or her administrator? Who knows? So most likely she wanted out of the classroom, and you defaulted and you did correct, like, hey, I don't know what you exactly told her. What did you, just.
I asked her to hold on until the break where I could get her to make an appointment.
Yes, perfect. And that's good. Like, that's what I would ask of any teacher. Don't default to immediately anytime a kid asks to give them what they want and send them out. When it gets to the point that we can audibly hear her making comments towards you, just being loud, she's now affecting the learning environment of those around her.
Yeah.
That's the only issue that I would have. So if you could do anything over again, would you do anything over again?
So I ended up getting her paperwork a couple of days after that,
Yeah.
that had instructions on how to handle some
Yes.
of this. And in this case, it was just let her go to her counselor,
Yeah.
was sort of the way to have handled that.
Yeah, you talking about the BIP that I sent you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was based off of
And
that.
we were waiting on that from whatever school that she transferred, and I think they took some of that and came up with something, but, cause I was like, we gotta do something.
Right. If I hadn't had that though, I said that's when I've kind of just still been brainstorming on.
Yeah.
I'm on one hand, I don't wanna, like I say, draw attention to a student,
Mhm.
not supposed to, but at the same time, when they start getting disruptive.
She drew attention to herself.
Right.
So that's no longer you drawing attention, that's her drawing attention to herself.
Right.
And we're struggling with her, and we'll continue to struggle with her, and as you do this longer and longer, you'll find out what's called mobility is students moving from school to school. She may be here 2 more weeks and she may be gone. You never know. While they're here, you love them, you teach on them, you do your best with them, but you're gonna learn that certain students just tend to come and go. Anytime I deal with a parent and I deal with a student and I try and flip the script on the parent, but if the parent's getting upset with me for dealing with their child in a certain way, and I say, ma'am, your child is affecting the learning environment of the 20 kids around him. You would be upset if your child came home and told you about some other student affecting his learning. So, we try and be firm, fair, and consistent with all kids in the same way. So now you have the BIP, but even if you got a kid that doesn't have a BIP and doesn't have that type of stuff, go ahead and send them out. At that point in time, that's not a hill that you wanna die on. They're gonna affect the rest of that lesson. What are you winning and what are you gaining by keeping them in the class would be, how I would approach it, so. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Students like that, I tended to try and make them my helpers. You luck out that you got, most of your kids in Avid wanna be in Avid, but when I talk chemistry, not every kid wanted to be in chemistry, so I did my best to make it something that they would enjoy. I tried, I'm not gonna make excuses for Isis. I have no idea about her home life. She might have a nun as a, well, I guess not a nun as a mother, but she might have a very loving set of parents, she may not. So, sometimes you do your best, so. Any other questions? I'm gonna read your area of reinforcement and refinement that I picked. Anything else you can think of?
Okay. Nothing comes to mind immediately.
Okay. I don't like the title Dean of Instruction, just FYI. It makes it I don't know, makes it sound glorified for some reason. I've just been doing this 12 years. I've been in a lot of classrooms. I found myself, when I was teaching, helping those around me so much to where I was like, I might as well just become an administrator instead of a teacher. I like getting in classrooms because I miss the classroom, and that's kind of when I need my cup filled, I go and I get into some particular classrooms. When I'm stressed out and I've only been dealing with discipline and things like that, I may pick a certain class, avid kids, to go in there and be around kids again. So for area reinforcement, I think you're a great planner. I think, the structure to your lesson plan, I think that you think out things, your breaks and stuff like that. There's been some debate amongst administrators about implementing breaks, and I've always stood up for my teachers and how that you've handled it. Eric does breaks. I don't know if Joe does, but certain people have done structured breaks. Structured breaks, I'm perfectly okay with. Giving 15 minutes and they're roaming around in the commons area, jumping in the restroom some, and they're all over the place. If I ever see that, I'll tighten up on it. But the way that you do breaks, I think that's fine. So I put the teacher plans a well thought out lesson that builds students' understanding upon previous information and into new objectives. So going back to Pythagorean theorem, even though they're supposed to know how to do that, you go back and you go over it, and then you use that to bridge into the 45, 45, 90 triangles. The teacher involves videos and real-world application, as well as structured notes and assignments. And I like that you went back to the notes. And what I've struggled with some teachers, why provide notes if you're never gonna have the kids go back to them? Like, what's the point of it, So when you do have those kids working, it should be an expectation that they have the notes, and that's something for you to train them to go back to over and over. I thought you did a great job on that. I also put the teacher thinks through what he wants the students to be able to do and how he can get them there. I always use the term begin with the end in mind. So you're thinking, this is what I need them to be able to do, and you backtrack little steps of how can I get them there. So, does that make sense? Area of refinement, I just went ahead and went with the low-hanging fruit, which was 3.2, managing student behavior, because we had that issue. Overall, though, I feel like you do manage student behavior okay. First year is extremely difficult. You're left with trying to balance how friendly can I be with them versus how hard do I have to be with them. And I understand that, so. But it kind of got to the point, especially with her on the phone with her mother, that was starting to disrupt. And you don't want other students to, always consider that at any point in time, your classroom could be filmed. A kid at any point in time. You don't ever want them to have something they can go home and be like, Mom, look, this girl in here is cussing him and on the phone with her mother, and he's not doing anything about it. So default, get them out of the room.
Okay.
And you can either really quickly pick up the phone, call the admin assistant, and just say, hey, I sent Isis Robinson out. She was being disruptive. She even called her mother while in the class. I'll send a referral later, because Isis may go down there, well, Isis, what'd you get sent out for? I don't know, or she'll make something up, so. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. Any questions about anything? I'll let you know that I mark you, there's 2 areas that I mark you developing, the rest of it I mark you proficient. Do you remember from the initial training what we kind of framed proficient as? What type of teacher? It's been a long time. We used the term rock solid.
Okay.
So rock solid, a proficient teacher is a rock solid teacher. So I think you're doing great as a first year teacher. I'm happy to have you on board. And I hope you come back next year. We hadn't talked about that. Do you intend on it?
I do.
Okay.
I'm off.
Perfect.
Crazy happen.
So what we will do, me, Amy, if I do science, I'm not over science. So I do me, Bethany, and David Howard. We talk about all the science things, and we look at master scheduling, and we look at data, and we look at all sorts of stuff, and we also look at feedback from teachers. Right now, John Pearson teaches, I think, half biology, half chemistry. And he may come to his department head, that's somebody you're comfortable with, and he may say, you know what, I really like the biology, and if next year I don't have to have chemistry, I wouldn't mind that. we use that input to create the master schedule for next year. So if you're like, you know what, and you don't always get what you want, you know, but you may say, I really enjoy geometry and I wouldn't mind, I'm a structured type person and I'll teach geometry all day. Then that's something for me and Amy to consider when we're having to move the puzzle pieces. Eric likes Algebra 1 straight all day. I liked the same chemistry all day. Our engineering teacher has 5 preps. He does not want to do the same thing all day. He wants to change it up and do different stuff. So any of that type of input, you can shuttle to Amy, and we consider it when we're doing master scheduling. So I've taken up more of your time than I intended to. Any questions? Anything I can help you with? Anything you need from me you can think of? You can be open around like he's evolved. I don't know if you have any inter-math personal disputes or any, I mean, this is the time that we can reflect on anything.
No, I think the one subject of the topic that I've had the most, say I'm not sure, but like you say, it's that balancing how hard it can be versus the student, well, lately with phones, I quit taking up cell phones because I had one student, and I think he started acting out because he had his phone taken up in front of his friend.
Mm.
And I'm thinking about this. I don't want to embarrass a student, and then they start misbehaving because of that. So I'm like, do I really want to go through the effort of taking up a phone? But now I feel like I'm seeing phone use uptick again.
Mm.
And so it's like without the threat of having the phone tag and the phone start coming out.
Yeah.
So what do you think is a good balance in
Yeah.
that sort of a situation?
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, it would start with setting the expectations, and then like once you build a relationship with them and you set the expectations, they have an understanding of when it needs to be used, and then you say things like, as opposed to, Joshua, put your phone up, you're saying, let's make sure we're using our phones properly. It has to be used for educational purposes, just giving them ideas like that as opposed to calling the kid out. And they kind of get a better understanding, okay, we're not using it for this right here, so unless I'm using it as my calculator, that's kind of ways around that.
I have seen people use red and green paper, and they just, it's up front and they flip it, and it's hanging or something, and red is no phones, green is phones. And I feel like students do better in classes where there's routines and procedures, and they know what to expect. So if that's red, then, and they have their phones out, and you've told them during instruction, when this is red, that's a no phone time, then you can only expect to have your phone taken up. And that's, you have to frame it for them.
Put that way.
This is proper cell phone usage in my class, and at any point in time, this is your class, you can change your rules at the semester, you can change them at the 6 weeks, you can change them tomorrow if you want to. Your class, your seating charts, that's up to you to do. And I'll have your back, but I feel like kids do better. You don't ever want to embarrass a kid, but if a kid is in the wrong, they're in the wrong.
Gotcha.
I like what he said, earlier I sent an email, I don't know if you got a chance to read it, it was about reconciliation and general housekeeping.
Right.
I ain't gonna lie, and don't do this when you're an administrator, it's easy when we're out there and we're fighting these kids on stuff, hats and hoodies and all that, and then you walk by a class and there's 17 kids with hats and hoodies and things like that, you almost get to the point like, why am I fighting this? But then you walk by Lewis Stevens' class where no kid has a hat or a hoodie, every kid's got an ID on, and every kid's got their mask properly because he ain't gonna put up with it not being like that. Then you're like, okay, I can do this. But when I was going through that in the beginning, it was like, no hats, don't let kids do this, and it was too many negative statements. So if you go back and look at it, I tried to just change the wording just a little bit, because I don't want to harm any relationship with teachers. And I don't want y'all to think that administration is coming down. But when it's 4 minutes, 5 minutes until the end of the day, the bell, and kids are pouring out of these classrooms and down the stairs and things like that, at one point in time, we just radioed, well, I guess the bell went off silently at 3:55 today because kids are hundreds of kids. So I don't want to be, I want to be firm. The kids need to be in the class till 4, but I don't want to be too soft, I guess. It's tough as an administrator because I'm friends with my teachers.
back to that again, setting expectations is a pretty good thing. Like a kid asks to go a specific place and then you ask them, okay, why? Why do you need to go? And then to see what reason they give you, and then you give them an explanation as to why they can't. So what if you decide to go outside and there's somebody there that wants to harm you, and then they let you go outside, and then now it's my responsibility. Once you start going into detail with them like that, they'll appreciate that, as far as setting the expectations and then building a relationship with them.
Right. I like the paper, clear visual signal on when phone use is okay. Because I have heard the, oh, I thought we were on break
Yeah,
version excuse, and
yeah,
a signal makes that clear.
yeah. Students asking to go see their counselors, you could flip it and say, well, I've actually, I've talked to the counselors and they've said not to send y'all down, that if they need you, they'll send a pass. Or you can scan this QR code up here and you can send them a message, that keeps them within the class. The hats and the hoods and things like that are always gonna be a battle, but y'all can always put it on us. Administration said, and I don't want them, because we're kind of to the point, and on my hierarchy of pissing me off, hats are higher than hoods. I fight the hoods, but it's pretty, there's no need for a hat in the building other than fashion. So we're kind of to the point where if we walk by a class and we see a kid wearing a hat, we're probably gonna fling the door open, say, hey, give me the hat, and then we're gonna follow up initially just with a little email to the teacher, hey, just a reminder. And we gotta do that 2 or 3 times, then it'll become a write-up, because we have to be taken seriously. And it's the same way as disciplining a child. We have to apply a little bit of pressure to change their behavior. It's the same with a teacher and writing a documented memo, so. Anything else you can think of?
That comes to
Well, I was clicking let it staff view, probably when I get in the hallway it'll work. But I'll go back to my office, click let staff view. I know that you probably wanna briefly do PLC with the other one.
I'll go through everyone else's side.
So, all right, boss, we appreciate you. If you got any questions, you just holler at us.